Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Poison Pen podcast and discussing uh, Sarah Blake's latest novel, Clean Air. My name is Patrick. I am your science fiction and fantasy selector. And today we've got a really great program. For those of you who are on Facebook, feel free to ask questions. I will definitely try to answer your questions as they're coming through, but I get the opportunity to discuss Clean Air by Sarah Blake, a National Endowment of the Arts Award winner, poet, novelist, and just lady extraordinaire. Sarah Blake, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So as you can see, I'm here in our Poison Pen media room, which is really a closet just outside the bookstore, because I was scared to death that if I went upstairs to the Poison Pen Press, that I wouldn't have all the technology working. So not the most beautiful and glamorous space in the world to be doing an interview from, but it works. So I'm excited about that.
I make up for it with a Diane Pieri painting, which I love. This is just the back of my living room where I've set up shop. So
it's absolutely beautiful. And I love modern art myself. And as you can see, I have a fine corkboard to my right. So Clean Air is I want to see your fourth novel coming out.
Fourth book.
Fourth book.
So, yeah.
And not only are you a novelist, but you're also a poet, and you're just quite the accomplished writer. I'm really curious, Sarah, how did you become the writer that you are now?
It was a bunch of like twists and turns where my parents loved that I liked to write, but were very sure that would lead me nowhere. So, I was a math major in college. They thought that would really help set me up for the world. They didn't care what I did as long as it wasn't writing. They were like, something that leads to a job, please. But at the end of college, I was like, I'm gonna try for graduate schools. And once I showed them that I could do graduate school with fellowships and get it paid for, they were like, okay. And I ended up doing a master's. And then I took a break for a year because I couldn't get into the MFA programs I applied for. So I tried again the next year. And then I did get into an MFA program. And so then I did another degree. And then after the MFA program, I had my baby, who's now 10, not a baby anymore. But it took a year to just kind of focus on that because my body was incapable of anything else. And then I got the grant from the NEA. So I kind of looked up and I was 30 and I hadn't gotten any other experience besides being a writer. And I was like, I guess I'm in this for the long haul. Which was good though, because it is my love, but it was a bit of a surprise to have kind of fallen backwards and realized like, oh, like I haven't done anything else but this. I have no options. But no, I had this book from my thesis at my second degree that was all about Kanye West. And obviously a very different Kanye West than we see right now. And that was my first poetry book to come out, and I really thought I'd only ever write poetry, but after I had my son, my brain kind of changed, and all of a sudden I was writing really long poems and book length poems, and I was telling stories, and I was just interested in all these different modes of narrative. So I wrote another book, and it's kind of like half book, half I have it here. So it's called Let's Not Live on Earth. The second half is a story about a woman who goes off and gets on a spaceship. And after that, my brain like kind of changed again. And suddenly I was writing prose, and it was turning into a novel once I let it. At first I was really doubtful because I'd never been any good at writing prose. So I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. And then but that was Nema, and that was, that changed everything. And now I really love working in both genres, and they're both really precious to me and the kind of space they give me. And so that was my weird journey.
It's an incredible journey because becoming a writer, we change, we grow within the writing process, which I always find so fascinating, talking with all of these different authors that some people said, yeah, I was, at one point in time, you're ready to write poetry your mind changes and you say, no, I'm good with writing prose. But sometimes it's those life experiences as well that you need to have in order to be able to understand character and understand uh, why they're doing what they're doing. Um, did you feel like you needed sort of that growth maybe in terms of just age and experience to be able to really bring that out of your characters, their drive, their ambition?
Yeah, I mean, my mother had always said that to me. She's like, I think you're going to end up writing prose when you're older and you've lived more life. And I mean, I think that was a huge part of it. And also just trusting myself that like my thoughts were of interest. Like that was always a problem for me, even with my poetry, was understanding like my place in my work, because you can write poems that you don't see the speaker and you don't see the writer at all. And I was really into that at first. I wanted to hide my age and hide my gender and hide my like experience of the world and hide that I love pop culture. And I was just writing these poems that I thought were like what poems were supposed to be. And it wasn't until I kind of really broke out of that entirely that I was like, oh no, like I have a place in my work, and my work only gets better when I come to embrace that. But that's a really big shock. It was a really big shock for me of like how to trust that like your own experiences are valuable. And yeah, and then I've just gotten better at kind of understanding that. And I've written some nonfiction now, and every time I do something a little bit different, I understand a little bit more how experience plays into things. And I'm really grateful that I love to write prose now, because it helps me process so many experiences that I'm having. And sometimes it's the wrong one. Sometimes I need a poem to get through like something with my mom's death or whatever, or sometimes I need the memoir to talk about something that happened, so everything fits differently. Like Clean Air is a lot of really actual things that my son did and said, that I had nowhere else to put. Like you can't just fill poems up forever and ever with like adorable, weird things that your child says. Maybe you can. I wasn't able to do it, but the novel could hold all of that. That was a pleasure for me.
So there was a line that I truly loved, before we dig in deep. So your main character Isabel has a daughter named Cami, and they talk. She brings her to daycare, and they have a conversation with another kid, and at one point they're pretending that they're robots, and saying weird things, and Isabel's having a conversation with one of the mothers, Andy Andromeda. She says, kids say the weirdest things, and it's really true. I mean, it's very funny. And one of the things that I really love about Clean Air and about Nema is the fact that you are so introspective with your characters, and they really feel like they live on the page. I love the fact that you take your main perspective has predominantly been female, which I think is the most authentic way for you to write, and you really dig in deep to how the characters act and are motivated, and they really shine on the page. So going into Clean Air, do you mind giving us a little bit of a perspective of what's happened, and give us a little bit of insight on your main protagonist, Isabel?
Yeah, so Clean Air is this very bizarre world where in 10 years from now, the trees, the plants, everything kind of acts simultaneously, it seems like, to release the most pollen that's ever been seen released ever. And it makes the air completely toxic. I like to think of one of those videos where they show a tree being knocked by a construction truck, or when a tree falls down. And it's like if you were standing in that horrible yellow cloud that came out, what would happen? And for people who aren't allergic, nothing would happen. But for me, I feel like my asthma would be like, no more breathing. So that's what happens. And it mostly kills off just huge amounts of the population. And the survivors are either people who kind of understood that this was coming, because, spring doesn't hit all at once. So some people planned better than others, and some people just ended up lucky. Isabel ended up in a hospital that day because that's where she often was, because her mother had died recently and she had gotten a part-time job working in the morgue. And a hospital is well equipped. They've got air scrubbers, they've got plastic sheeting, they can create quarantine zones. They are a building that's capable of fighting off something that's just in the air. Maybe not perfectly, but definitely better than some of the others that would be around. So that's what happens 10 years from now. We just get flashbacks to that time, and most of the book is taking place another 10 years on from that. And at this point, a kind of tech conglomerate took over, had a plan, restructured everything, built these small, weird towns that are filled with little plastic domes that can be airtight and are monitored mostly by robots. Robots are being controlled remotely, the way that we might think of drones being controlled. And things are going pretty well, actually. Now, the town seems kind of great. People go around like everything's fine. They have all these new rules. They have to wear masks. You can only be outside for a very short amount of time before you start feeling the effects of the pollen. But schools are up and running. Arts are making a comeback. All these things are supposed to feel great. But Isabel doesn't always feel settled. But the big thing is that as the book opens, a serial killer has started to go around piercing the plastic domes, and just by doing that kills off whoever's inside. So an entire family in one go. So it's really bizarre. It's a serial killer book with no gore. There's no blood.
That's exactly it. It's really different because so the best way that I've been able to describe Clean Air is you've got literary climate science fiction in a post-dystopian utopian world,
yes,
with domestic suspense and a serial killer on the loose. And you've got everything in a really tightly contained package. I mean, your book is close to 300 pages, and in terms of movement, you pack an awful lot. Every word and every choice that you put into that book is so well thought out, that there is no room for book bloat, which I was really impressed with Clean Air. So coming from that perspective, you're packing in all these different kind of genres together, and you're making this really cool novel. What was that process like? What was it, to create this sort of baby? And where did the idea of all of this pollen come from? I know here right now we've got every orange tree blossoming, in the valley, and soon we'll have the mesquite trees and everything will be covered in pollen. So I'm really curious where that came from.
Yeah, well, you'll have to send me a picture.
Totally will. My car just covered.
Yeah, that used to happen to us when we lived in the States. We were in Philly, but it doesn't happen as much here. Certain streets it happens on, but not as much. And it's been nice because the inspiration for this story came from my terrible allergies that started. They'd been pretty calm, and then we can't tell. We have no idea why something changed, and for a few years, I kept ending up in the ER every spring with just uncontrollable asthma. And so I ended up going to the allergist. I started getting shots every week after doing like the massive testing. They'd done all the testing on me when I was a child. I got diagnosed with asthma when I was 8. But it was just very different as an adult to go through the same process. Just because when I was a child, I was on my back because your arms aren't big enough to do all those tests. And the biggest concern was that I had been flagged as allergic for chocolate, and I almost died, and they made me cut chocolate out of my diet for 2 weeks to see if there's any change in me. And there wasn't. So chocolate was then back, and that was fine. But it was high drama for an 8-year-old. So this one was more about the trees, the plants. I learned like which trees were my worst trees. They did like a whole section up here of intradermal shots and then measured those hives. And everything was a hive except for ragweed, oddly enough. So like I'm super sensitive to to everything and animals and grasses and mold. So I get a bad week in the fall and a super bad week in the spring is usually how it goes. So I always have like a corticosteroid inhaler for the bad weeks, and I just have my rescue for the rest of forever. And this book kind of came out of those allergy shot weeks. They had this graph in there showing you what trees were pollinating when and when their peak times were. So if you were having a bad week, you could look at your chart and know which tree was getting you today. That was just a really interesting experience. And you have to wait 30 minutes when you get them to make sure you don't have a terrible reaction while you're sitting there. So it's a very like quiet, peaceful time. And I would do a lot of world building in my head while I was there, or like jotting down notes. So the inspiration came from that. I started to think about what if everybody was as sensitive to pollen as I was, and what if the trees got together and like, we can make this worse, which was also a sentiment I heard a lot going around every year. Like people would be like, pollen's really bad now. Pollen's worse than it was. This year's a bad year, and climate change is making it worse, and this is making it worse. And I'm going to this website to check out what the counts are. And are you looking at the counts and like all these things? And I guess it's part of being in an allergist office, right? That you start to hear dialogue.
Right, exactly.
And I was just like, man, this is kind of fascinating. Like these are fascinating comments. And even now that I made a video list on YouTube, a playlist of all sorts of clips from like crazy things that trees have done, and also just segments from news reports where they talk about allergies and peak times. And it's just interesting to see that like very typical newscaster vibe, but then with a whole thing dedicated to trees. So yeah, so it was playful for me, but also helping me process something really terrifying that was going on for me at the time. But then when I moved on to my story, like with Naima, I knew my character before heading into it. That's like why I wrote the book. For this book, I had the world going into it, and I had no idea about the family that I wanted to focus on, other than I knew I wanted a 4-year-old, wanted to talk about young motherhood, what that feels like, looks like, and what all the weird things that kids say. And so my son had a tree friend, like Cami calls her, she has a tree friend that she's waving to across town. My son had a tree friend that he waved to at the bus stop and hugged every day he got home from school. So I was just like, it was interesting to see his relationship with trees as I was having my new relationship with trees. And I was like, okay, like this is fun, but also what's happening here. But so to start writing the book, I actually wrote a whole bunch of letters from Isabel to Cami, like about 40 pages of letters, until I understood Isabel and the dynamic and what kind of characters I was dealing with. And yeah, that's how that whole process got started. And then once I had them all, I knew the world, I knew them, and I knew not what I was going to do, because I don't plot anything before I go into a book. But I knew enough to get started.
So being in the desert, and so I was getting really bad allergies. I've got to say, I went to the allergist and they did the allergy, and they said, basically, you're allergic to the entire desert. Why are you here? And I said, I don't know. Life happens, right? So I kind of understood sort of the feeling that, there are particular time periods where even pre-COVID, that I would just have to hold myself up, because you can't go anywhere or do anything because your allergies are really bad. You got your rescue inhaler, which is such a pain in the butt, just in case. I've got the EpiPen, all those fun little things. And so I could really relate in terms of, hey, climate's changing, spring is changing. It's really interesting here in the desert because we're getting longer and longer springs, it seems like, and shorter winters. So, and then we're getting these summers that are just intensely hot. And part of that is caused 100% by climate change. If you don't live in the Southwest, you may not be experiencing all the effects quite yet of climate change, but it's been very, very strange. I mean, when you get to 125 degrees, one of the things that I found really interesting was, reading this just at the I'm hoping is the tail end of our COVID pandemic, and the fact that Isabel's experiencing a lot of these similar emotions that I think any one of us is currently feeling right now. And it was very cathartic in a way to read how Isabel is dealing with this, because she feels so lost in so many ways. And especially as a young mother, she wants to be there for her daughter, but at the other time she needs her alone time, and she loves her husband, yet she knows that a little bit of their relationship is strained and changed a little bit. How did you dig into that emotion with Isabel? Were those things that you were feeling as a young mother?
Yes, of course. And really not sure of where I was headed to, because of being a writer, which is a very strange profession to be in. So I was close to going back to work. I did go back to work at one point, and then my son, every time he got a cold, it turned into an ear infection. Mm-hmm. And that was like, okay, so then we pulled him out again for the next year, because you kind of go through a season where colds and ear infections are bad, and then put him back in the year after that. And then he had a cold like a normal child. It didn't like instantly clog up his ears and cause fevers and infections and all these horrible things. But I'm talking about things then in the scope of years, like a whole, okay, well, this is how we'll tackle this whole year, which is like, it's short and it's long. And all the different ways that my time was being used were really fascinating to me. And, when I could get some distance from it and think about it like that, I was just kind of felt dug in. And my son and I are like best friends. We love being with each other and doing all sorts of silly things, and I love to do as many things as I can for him. Especially as a child, I felt like he liked activities for 2 minutes, so he would be like so excited to watercolor paint with me or something, and we'd sit down and we'd do it, and he'd be like, done. And I remember like he had a friend who had a little sister who could sit and water paint for like an hour. Like, you didn't even need to watch her. She'd be like, yeah, I'm good. Like, and
leave me alone, I've got my art time.
Yeah. And where he was just like, this was awesome, thank you, 2 minutes, done. And that's how he was with everything. So I remember we even just like, I would keep different toys in different parts of the house. I'd hide some toys in the closet just so that I could constantly like have something new to be like, hey, like, do you remember this puzzle? Like I knew every cafe around town that had little toys for kids, and we would go there to like just to give him all the things he needed. It just felt like when we sent him to school, I was so ready because I knew he was so ready. I was like, he seems tired of me, like not in a horrible way, but just in the, like, his brain is doing so much and needs so much right now. I remember other parents being like, no, my kid's really just happy being home. It's like, no, I think my kid needs to be surrounded by stimulus.
I think that's every little boy. I mean, every little boy, we're completely, ADHD all over the board. We just, it's little batteries all over the place, going back and forth. I just think it's just being a kid. But I really like Cammie, and I like Isabel's relationship with her young daughter. I think that, Cammie is really integral to this story. Cammie sees things and understands things that you wouldn't expect a 4-year-old to see and understand. And this entire family, Isabel's living in terror, not only with dealing with the problems on the outside world, but now, and after dealing with everything, thinking that, hey, we're in a utopia, that somebody's going around killing families for who knows what reason. So I'm really curious in terms of that, building Cammie into the story is an integral portion of it, and then Isabel's fears of what's going on outside of what was the norm.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I was trying to work with a lot, especially as my son was getting to the age where he was starting to go to school. and I don't mean preschool, I mean like a public school system, where we were not in a bad school system of any kind, but we were having a lot of reports of anti-Semitism happening around, and obviously gun violence was constantly an issue. And you felt like it won't happen here.
Right.
But also you had to ask before play dates if they had a gun or not. And I knew that the woman at my bus stop had guns in her house. She was ex-military, so I knew they were probably stored really well. I knew they were there. And she had 2 kids. So I was trying a lot to figure out like how to deal with a kind of a silent fear, like it's ever present, but it's not it's not the highest fear on your list. Like you're more likely to get vomited on that weekend than you are to get shot. But it felt very constant. And yet like you're not supposed to talk about it all the time either. And it's pretty hopeless, it feels like, in how you can address it. So for me, this killer was kind of that same kind of vibe. You'd think it would be the pollen, but no, they've kind of figured out how to deal with that. They live pretty normally in this bizarre life. And but the serial killer is just, they can't do anything about him. He doesn't even really seem to have a pattern, and they just don't know what to do other than wait and see. And they're trying to figure it out, and there's all these maps on the news and like dots marking where things are happening, and but that's not helping. It's not. And it doesn't seem like she has very many good friends to talk to until she makes friends with Andy. So she really struggles when she's having something that she needs to talk through. She has Kaito, her husband, but he's working full time. She's obviously not going to talk about all of those fears with Cammy. Yeah, she's stuck.
I love the scene where she's in the mall, and at the mall, she goes to the mall quite a bit as a way to sort of escape. She's dropped her daughter off from school. She doesn't really want to go home. And so she goes to the mall pretty frequently, and they have quiet rooms there. And I love the scene where you say that, in that room, if she just wants to cry or scream, she's able to. It's completely dead silent. And I think to myself, what a wonderful invention that really should be in more places, where we can just, if we need to yell, scream, cry, that's just completely soundproof. So A, you don't freak out your neighbors. B, you get out that emotion. I thought that was just, there's these really interesting touches that you're doing in your world building that I just really absolutely love in Clean Air. And I think you do a spectacular job.
That one was my agent. She was like, I think I would die if I didn't have some bit of privacy in this world, when everything's like plastic and there's no real walls between anything. And I was like, that's so true. And so she inspired the privacy pods. I was like, I'm gonna make a spot at the mall. Because I am a mall lover. I feel like I'm more of a mall lover now because there aren't really a lot of malls going on over here. Certainly not your like typical American mall. And it was a reaction to Nema too, right? Like Nema, all I had was the arc. So I was like, when I get to my next book, I'm gonna write Instagram into it, and bad TV and toilet paper and all the things that I did on the arc. So yeah, I love a good mall. I miss malls. You can tell I'm from New Jersey. Yeah.
The sad thing is that I live right near a mall that that I grew up going to, and they just tore it down. So I'm a little sad about seeing that place go, because you remember those good times, and they used to shoot fireworks over the mall and on the 4th of July, things like that. And so I'm kind of sad to see that one go. And then of course they're going to build something else, and it's going to be different. And things change, but I miss that. I miss the mall. Speaking of which, Isabel seems like she's stuck in bad TV, which I thought was really fun. So she loves and I'm not going to call it bad TV. I shouldn't call it bad TV, because I watch a lot of these things. She loves Property Brothers. She loves MTV Cribs. She loves, I think you and I are of the same generation. So I think Isabel watches a lot of the same shows that maybe we watch as sort of trash TV. Um, there doesn't seem to be anything new being produced, even though that they're talking about a renaissance within this book. So can you tell me a little bit of Isabel's love of bad television within this book?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? How I envision is that like there's still a kind of Netflix type platform, but no one's really ready to make new things yet. I'm sure that will happen if because they seem like they're starting to have enough structure and enough space that they could okay be like, okay, we're gonna make a warehouse to be a place where we can just set up movie sets. Why not? If they
Right.
have warehouses for the food, why can't they have that? But I don't think they're there yet. um but yeah, so I also think, it's what I turn to when I especially pandemic mode, like, but any time where I felt really isolated, even a lot with young motherhood. My son loved to have me with him at every moment, even if he was playing something that had nothing to do with me. And if I had a book, he would like be like, no, you're paying attention to a book and not me. But if I had my phone, he was like, okay, that's a thing I see around enough. You use that for many reasons. That's fine. So I could play a show on my phone. I could play music on my phone. I wrote one of my poetry books. The next poetry book that comes out was written on my phone beside my son when he was very small, because he wouldn't bother me if I had my phone. That was still enough of a level of attention that I was sharing with him. Um, but I watch a lot of shows, and I'm obviously a procedural fan. Like I've watched every crime show that I can think of, that has to do with fictional crimes. I think they're the best, but you don't want to watch that next to a 3-year-old. Or so I ended up watching a lot of things that I was like, well, I like this, and what are you gonna notice? Like if I put on Millionaire Matchmaker, like I don't think Patty Stanger is gonna like damage him forever. I think we're fine. Like, and so I would watch a lot of teas like that, a lot of home renovation shows. I love those, and HGTV, all the like. I don't know if I have any talent. It's a lot of things. Like I love Top Chef. I'm the pickiest eater you'll ever meet. I have no idea what I'm looking at, what anything tastes like, but I just love hearing chefs talk about their work. I think it's a lot like listening to an artist. I'm really into anything where an artist kind of talks about what they're doing. And so chefs are a huge part of that for me. I love hearing chefs talk about their relationship to their food and like art making, which, Netflix has a lot of great shows about that. So I'm lucky.
Oh, absolutely. I'm hooked on a television channel off of Roku called Tastemade, and they have Rachel Koo, who's really big in Britain, and so she goes to these different locations because we can't travel anywhere, right? And so she's traveling someplace and she's eating something good, and then she goes back to her London flat and she makes, something that's sort of similar to what she ate in the country, and she talks about it, and it's very calming sort of show, and a great sort of television, and the sort of thing that you need in a pandemic. I mean, you need those shows that sort of bring you back to when life was a little bit more normal, when things felt a little bit more normal, things felt a little bit more safe. It's a very safe place, very little conflict. And I think that that's part of, I think, why we gravitate to those sorts of shows during these kinds of periods. In terms of world building, Nama and Clean Air both are places where you had to do a lot of world building, especially Clean Air. Nama a little bit. I'm curious what your process is in terms of world building, building in that science fiction universe, because it isn't something that you necessarily have to do in every mystery novel, and you had to in this case.
Yeah, and my next novel too. Like I love world building. I don't know what it is about it, but I like thinking about just an off-kilter world. Like I love to play with this idea of a utopia that's not as great as it seems, which all of my books do. It makes me suddenly seem like very like you can simplify me to something real quick. Like even in the Kanye book, it's like looking at all the pros of celebrity, but it was really talking about all the cons of it, right? Because that's talking a lot about him grieving his mother's death publicly and how horrible that is, which I hadn't thought about until I watched it happen. And Let's Not Live on Earth, the new place she reaches on the spaceship is purported to be utopic. Nema, the whole idea is God saying, you go make the next better world. I'm giving you the same pieces, but you do it right this time. And then clean air, that they are able to come out of this in a much more planned way, with a bunch of other things kind of guiding their survival, and for a lot less people, and that suddenly they've reached a kind of utopia. But I love to deal with all the nitty gritty of that, and where you can kind of poke at it, where it cracks, where it falls apart, what works and doesn't work about it. But I do find that I am not, like, I created so much more of Clean Air than made it into Clean Air. I drew pictures of it, and I met with urban planners, and I wrote about more things. I thought maybe because crime scenes would be difficult to get into. Oh, that's right. Because crime scenes would be difficult to get into unless they patched it, I thought maybe they would recreate them in another space, and then look at them from there, which I thought would be a really interesting thing to do. And then, like, that didn't make it into the book. None of that made it. So I feel like I do a lot of world building in my head, and I think a lot of it out, but then I really just stayed true to my character and follow them and see what comes up. And if it comes up, great. And that usually gets through to enough of the details to create the world. But you do have to do some trust, and obviously on revisions you discover which things you actually needed to clarify a little bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say it takes a village to write a book, and one of the challenges with self-publishing, I've always felt, is that you don't necessarily get the feedback that constructive feedback that a trained editor can sometimes help with in terms of shaping or guiding a book. What I really like, though, about Clean Air is the fact that you do tell us very clearly what the world is, and what's going on, and you use these little details to give us an idea of, oh, okay, this is caused by an overabundance of pollen. This is why people can't breathe. You don't go out there and hit me over the head and say, this is what happens and this is why. And you bring it all together very naturally and very organically. And I think that is true testament to brilliant world building and all the preparation that you put in behind it to give us, the reader, and respecting the reader, to be able to take those details that you give us and be able to expand on it without giving us pages and pages and pages and pages of dialogue or explanation. And I think that that's something that's really paramount to a strong science fiction writer.
Yeah, I hope I can continue to nail it. It is. I have the first draft. I really hadn't figured out how they got from the turning to now. I knew what now looked like. I knew what the turning meant in terms of the plants, but I did not understand how one came from the other. But I did by the end, and it was just like kind of plopped in the last 40 pages, and I was like, this is not where this information belongs. So it was a really interesting time for me. This is before we tried to sell it, even, because my first draft, as you can tell, with 40 pages of letters, and then kind of being ready to jump in, and then figuring out how we got from one time to another, at the end, like nothing was in the right spot. It went through a huge revision before I really showed it to anybody, where I was like, wait a second, which was a really interesting process for me and really fun. Like every revision of this book was really fun, to figure out the order. And then I remember there was one revision that was solely just for me to get my timeline right, because I'd never dealt with something as specific as a serial killer, where I was like, okay, this time we're going through with dates. I'm going to just date things and name things and write it out until I totally understand how long everything was. And it
it has to have sort of a natural feel to it. And what I really like about your book is it is sort of a book of two parts. So you're building the world within the first half, and then the second half you're diving deep into the mystery of what's going on with the serial killer and the investigation that's going on. Um, I don't want to talk too much more about that because I feel like we're entering into spoiler territories. But I think that, you know, what you did to build out this book was really necessary. I would love to see you return at some point in time to that world, if not the same characters, but to that world to see what happens 10, 20, 30 years down the road, because I would be fascinated to see what would end up happening. Um, so I've got to ask you a really important question. Dystopian has been incredibly popular over the past few years. I really love the fact that you chose to do a utopia with some slightly dystopian elements. You know, we are post-apocalyptic would be a better term
Yeah.
for it. Why utopia?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by them. I mean, especially I think right now with the way our political system is working and how polarized it is, I feel like what politics has become is very little about politics and very much about selling ideas of what a country could look like, and like a not a landscape, but like a political scape of like, you know, this could look like this if we went this way. Um, no, and that's those are the narratives that are working right now. It seems like too, in order to sway voters. It's no some people are still voting because of like one or two, you know, we hear there I forget what's that called, like one issue voters or something. There's
Right.
a term for it. But I feel like a lot of people are actually more involved now in terms of like stories, and they have, you know, and we're seeing their very big sway that they can have in terms of what people believe are truths or not truths. And so I think about it a lot in terms of what, you know, if I get to build a society, if I get to look at what society is, if I get to think about what perfect would be, and then I go about making that for my characters, and then I even see what I missed and or what I can't actually account for, and random violence being one of them. So I think that's such a crucial thing for us all to kind of think about, especially as more and more that's what we're presented with as how we should think about the world and our future and our decisions that we're making right now. um and it's, yeah, I think it's something we all have to think about in terms of, I don't know, like small changes that we can make, and but what actually is going on, like I don't know, I think about things as small as like recycling, and like I was raised to recycle, it was part of the school education, it was for my son, like everybody understood it, whatever. And then you become an adult and you realize that like if the corporations don't decrease the pollution, it's not going to matter how good I am at recycling my single-use plastics for my strawberries. Like I'm still going to do it, but I know it's not making the effect that I was convinced it was making when I was 5 and taught about how we were all going to like save the planet.
It's really frustrating because it is one of those thoughts where if I do my composting, if I do my recycling, if I separate out, a lot of places, apartment buildings, especially here in the United States, are notorious for not having recycling programs.
Yeah,
But then, you know, also if you bring in a recycling program, it costs so much more money to do so. People don't necessarily want to pay that extra money here in the United States. And then, you know, how much of it is actually getting recycled to a point where it can be reused and it's energy friendly, that
right.
even though, you know, and so I agree with you, it's those sort of things where it's like, okay, no, we need to make the bigger changes first and then these smaller changes as well, in, you know, in a concerted effort to sort of reduce our carbon footprint. It's sort of a scary proposition. I mean, Phoenix just keeps on getting hotter and hotter. we're in our worst drought in 1200 years. I
Oh my
mean,
God.
this is an insane time period to think about, you know, what could happen. And climate fiction, I feel like, is very real and very prescient to talk about. Um, Speaking of which, so you finished Clean Air. I'm sure you've got another project. It sounds like you have a book of poetry that's just on its way out. You said
Yeah,
you're working on that.
next spring there'll be the next book of poetry, which is also, it's a book length single poem in 60 parts, and it's and it's prosy. You can see that it was one of my like between how my brain was like learning how to go from one to the other. It's just, publishing takes a few years to follow what you're doing at home.
Totally.
So this is, it's a story about a you. So it's my first, I identify as non-binary, and it's my first character that you can't tell anything about this character. No race, no gender, no age, because it's all in second person. So you get lost in the woods with a a pregnant horse, a mouse, and a dead bird's ghost. That it starts with a dead bird, and you bury the bird, and then the ghost starts following you around, kind of in thanks and kind of confused at their new role in the world as this very wacky ghost with this incredibly long tongue. So yeah, it's a wild book, as I intend to do.
That sounds fascinating. That sounds sort of up my alley. In terms of, I love reading stuff that's a little bit out there sometimes, and to get in there and to sort of dig deep, and I'm really, one of the things I really appreciate about a lot of modern science fiction fantasy is the fact that they're not afraid to go into the non-binary LGBTQ, discussing race, discussing a lot of important issues. I really get frustrated with people saying, well, I don't read science fiction, or I don't read fantasy because it's too out there. And I'm like, no, it isn't. It's discussing a lot of the same problems that we're going through in a different universe, in a different way. And I think that that's what makes it such an important genre to discuss and to read.
Yeah, I love reading my son his MG fantasy books. Like, we love reading them every night. Like, it's such a pleasure. And I'm like, yeah, of course, if you grow up reading that, you're going to hold on to wanting those things.
Well, and one of the things I've noticed over the years is, romance and science fiction fantasy are often not considered literary. And there are authors like you, Sarah, who end up putting in the literary bent to our genre. I mean, there's pulp fiction or consumer fiction, and then there's books like Clean Air that really have that literary bent that help lead people into reading and understanding science fiction. And I think that that is really important, with a very literary, academic bent, so to speak.
Yeah, I hope it's happening more and more. I think I see it happening more and more. I know, more and more people are watching sci-fi. Like, I remember in my house growing up, like Star Trek: The Next Generation was my dad's favorite thing, and my mother couldn't stand it. And I loved it, of course, because I was always watching whatever my dad had on TV, because he was where the TV was, so I was going to be there. So a lot of action movies and a lot of sci-fi. And so it's always been a part, and now it's more and more. Like, I loved Altered Carbon's first season. I like the second season too, but like, I think first season was exceptional. But I can name lots of sci-fi television, so I think I can only imagine it's going to come more and more into all these other genres, start kind of all the genre bending that I love to do and see. I hope my next novel is about a very strange hotel, and it's got all this world building, and it's created this super bizarre environment, but actually it's the first one that is really everything could happen the way I have it. Like, you don't see those things all in one place, but they do exist all scattered around right now. So I'm very excited for what that can be like. It's been funny to, like, as a comp title, I've been pitching it as like Meow Wolf, the bizarre museum, like meets some other books, and it's like, this is so weirdly, I'm pitching it as like a museum meets an art experience, but I don't care because it's true.
So if any of our viewers here haven't been to Meow Wolf, either in Santa Fe, or there's several different installations in different cities around the world, it's absolutely incredible. It's really weird. It's very interactive. It's very tactile. It's, you walk through a refrigerator into a different universe, and it's just sort of fun and funky, and it's a whole bunch of young artists getting together and doing some fun art installations. And so I it's actually one of my favorite places that I've ever been, was Meow Wolf. It just creates so many cool memories. What are you reading right now?
Ooh, well, right now I'm reading Appleseed by Matt Bell, which I'm looking around. Oh, my computer is on it. That's why I can't show it to you, because my computer is on it. Which is another literary sci-fi that recently came out. And I'm also reading this one. I can show you. I just got like an advanced reader's copy of Kaleidoscope by Cecily Wong. But I'm doing an event with Matt Bell next week. So if anybody wants to see me talk again.
Yeah, the Curious Galaxy is hosting you next week. A friend of the Poison Pens. It's sort of funny because us independents sort of have friendly relationships with each other. So, and Matt's a really great guy. He's been to the store a couple times and talked. We missed him for Appleseed, unfortunately, but he's also taught at Arizona State University for creative writing. I'm not sure if he's still there or not. So
yeah, he is, I think, unless I'm out of date too. Yeah, we met. He came to read at my MFA program. However long ago that was, I guess a decade-ish ago. So we've been friends since then, ever since that reading. So
Matt's an incredible guy, and we're just so lucky. Oddly enough, Phoenix brings in a lot of literary people. It's sort of surprising, this literary city. I think it's because, we don't get a lot of snow, and during the summer you're holed up in there, but you can at least escape in the evening, and it's not too bad. For young writers and for people who are looking to improve their craft, what are your recommendations to them as they continue on their writing journey?
Yeah, it was funny. I just answered this question yesterday because I'm going back to my alma mater. I went to the College of New Jersey, and that was one of their questions for like the campus newspaper. I think a lot about, I love to read interviews. That's one of my favorite things to read. Obviously, all these virtual readings are such a wealth that I didn't have access to when I was that age and studying that way. And I love it, like that I can just go on YouTube now and watch any author that I love do an event like this. I think it's really important, like once a year, to sit down and write about what your goals are as an artist and how you think about your work. Like as soon as you start to have to apply for grants or fellowships or any of these bigger things, you really need to get good at writing about your own work and what it's doing, and thematically, and why, and like why your passions are what they are. So I really recommend. I used to do it by making myself apply to something because it was like a prompt, but I do it sometimes even when I don't have to, just to like remind myself of like what my goals are, especially with a particular project. Like if I'm 2 drafts into a novel, but I still feel like I haven't quite refined what I'm doing, sometimes I will just try to write an artist statement about the book. So that's a weird one, but maybe it's good to do a weird one because everybody's heard all the other ones of what you can do.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and that's and it sticks. So taking a look here at the audience, I'm looking at Facebook, and Steve Schwartz, who's a really good customer of ours, he ended up bringing up that the book sounds a lot like Paolo Bacigalupi's The Water Knife, which is also very similar in terms of climate change and a little bit of a thriller associated with it. Do you have any science fiction writers or people that you follow that you feel are good people that you enjoy and follow and respect? That question came out terribly, but I think
I see. I just started learning about The Water Knife, and I don't remember that author's name because someone was thinking about pairing me with them for an event, and so then I got totally smitten with them, everything I could find online. So that's on my growing list. I feel like I have very weird overlaps again with literary fiction because that's what I mostly read. So like I love Lydia Millett's A Children's Bible, which is it feels Noah's archy dystopic apocalyptic, but it's also well, no, it definitely is all of that, but like, would you call it sci-fi? Like people definitely have called it cli-fi, but I'm not sure I'd call it sci-fi all the way, but also the elements are there in some parts of the book anyway. But she's an idol. I loved Helen C. Phillips' The Need, which plays with parallel dimensions kind of meeting each other, but in a super literary weird, now there's two moms of the same one set of children, and like, blah, it's just amazing. I often think of these are like kind of the sister titles that I think of for Clean Air. I think of A Children's Bible as a sister title for Nema, but The Need and Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, which is, if you just kind of think about what you figure out by the end of that book, it doesn't seem as weird as it is. So forgetting that by the end, you kind of just know more directly what's happened. The writing and the story to get there is just her kind of trying to feverishly, it seems she's in a hospital bed with a super high fever, trying to piece together what has happened to her and what happened to the child that she was with. And I couldn't put it down. So I'm really interested in these books that have either a science fiction or fantasy or mystery vibe, but also I love the literary for sentences, and like I'm kind of a kook for weird sentences. Like if that's like my thing. I'm like, if I don't see a weird sentence in because even some people think it has to be a long sentence or a complicated sentence. Like, no, I want to see like a weird use of a colon or something. And like I remember I took a snapshot of one of these sentences from A Children's Bible that was just like, the water carried us, we were carried, as one, which and I was like, this is the perfect, most weird sentence. So that's kind of something I'm looking for in my first 10 pages when I'm reading a book. So yeah, I'm a nut for weird sentences.
I love purple prose myself. I'm a sucker for it. I love regular prose, but every now and again, good purple prose is something that I will fall in love with. So just so lucky. Well, Sarah, congratulations on Clean Air. I think you have done a phenomenal job with this book. And I just want to thank you so much for taking your time and discussing this book. Hopefully for those of you out there, you can buy your book anywhere, but our books come with a book plate signed by Sarah because she is currently living in the UK. She's not living in the United States, so she can't just swing on by the Poison Pen to sign her books. But we do have signed book plates for her. Of course, the first 2 weeks of any novelist book is so important. So if you don't get it through us, get it anywhere. And Sarah, thank you so much for taking your time to do this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy your Saturday. Enjoy your evening, Sarah. And have a great day, guys. Thank you so much.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.